This is the trouble we get into when we have people who really know what they're talking about. They have a lot of information to share. The good news is that all of these PowerPoints will be posted on our website, so you can go to that. And we're filming it. We're filming the forum, and so if this is something that you would want to have in your communities, you can take it to your town meetings and share it with folks and get the discussion going there and right there in your hometown, your municipality. So thanks to our panelists. We have time for a few questions. And I have someone with the microphone here. So since we're filming, we're going to have a microphone for your questions. The governor is going to be announcing his budget today, correct? And so who thinks there'll be anything regarding broadband in that budget? Anybody? Show of hands.
Hi there. My name is Janine Deal. I live in Battle Creek, and I have a couple of questions. There is a book I recently heard of, and I have not read it yet. It's called Broken Promises, and it's about fiber optics that we've already paid. I think Kevin, he's shaking his head like, oh no, okay, that we've already paid $400 billion, I believe, for fiber to our homes, businesses, schools, and libraries, but that has not been delivered. Broken Promises is the name of the book. And then another thing, I love the internet. I have 100% hardwired DSL connection at home because I'm sensitive to wireless technology, and that's part of the reason why I'm here today, because there is a growing epidemic of people who are becoming sensitive due to the increasing levels of radio frequency radiation in our environment. And fiber, I have heard, is a safer alternative, especially for schools where children are getting nosebleeds and bleeding from the ears and things like that from really high levels of radio frequency radiation and strong routers. So maybe if Kevin could address, how that would work, if it could be 100% hardwired as far as the fiber goes and no wireless. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I'll try to tackle the first one. So the RF emissions concern would sometimes exist principally related to, wireless devices. I always try to approach this from a scientific standpoint. Outside, if you walk outside today on a sunny day, there's a giant radio transmitter sitting in the sky that's blasting you with RF frequency, far exceeding what any residential home router will ever provide to you.
That's natural, not man-made. That's natural radiation. It's not a man-made, not natural radiation, and it's not pulsed either. The radiation from the sun and other natural things is natural. It's not pulsed radiation. And experts are saying it is the pulsed radiation and the continuous exposure. FCC guidelines cover thermal effects. They've never studied in long-term, non-thermal, continuous exposure. And actually the National Toxicology Program recently did one of their biggest studies, a $25 million study, using cell phones and rats. And they actually, extinguished the rats before their lifetime ended naturally, but they did see an increase in tumors in the hearts and cancers in the male rats. So.
Okay, well, it looks like we need a little more research in that area for sure. We want to do this safely, right?
Thank you. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Wow, it's a lot to think about. Right here.
Hi, my question is for Baby. I happened to read the report that came out on January 16th, and what's the next steps in trying to close the digital divide for broadband?
Thank you for that question. So specifically in Detroit, we know that Rocket Fiber really wants to roll out some broadband. They have not set a date yet, so we're not sure what's happening at that end. But we know that they're working with a lot of community centers already that they have connected, and public libraries. So there is already stuff going on with that. The hope is really to get the infrastructure to the homes, not just to the community centers. So that would be the next steps right there.
Two-part. And the three-leg stool, not just giving access, but also the training and having the equipment. Are they partnering to make sure that there's a three-leg stool to the?
So I can't speak for Rocket Fiber, you'd have to ask them directly, so they were there when we did focus groups, for example, and something that kept coming up in those focus groups was that the equipment was missing and that the skills were missing. So they were very open to the idea of actually not just providing the infrastructure, but also the other two parts that are critical. But again, for the specifics, you would have to ask them.
Okay.
Thank you. Is that maybe Pierrette or Eric, you could answer this. How does that happen in other locations? What comes, the fiber optic comes first, and then what is the follow-up?
Well, specifically for us, and I'll let Kevin and Eric talk about any of their experiences, but for the programs that we're working on, we're primarily connecting schools. So a lot of the schools, there's something called E-rate funding, and that helps subsidize at least the connectivity part of it. And then for the wireless initiatives that we're working on, those actually just, the partnership is covering the cost of the equipment there, so there's not anything that's extra needed as far as the schools go.
Very good. Good. Eric.
Yeah, and we've seen that. You're right. It's a continuum of access, adoption, and use. So it's making sure that the infrastructure is there. There's a device to connect, and then the training that goes along with it, and the use part of it. So we've seen that. For example, Comcast's Internet Essentials program, it helps lower the cost of a monthly connection. It also provides access to a low-cost device. I'm not certain about training involved with that, but I think there is an element of training. So we've definitely seen that three-legged model being replicated in other places, and I would hope that any initiatives that happen in Detroit would also follow that same model, because you can't have one without the others.
Okay. There's a question. Thank you, Eric.
One of the approaches for reducing the cost of infrastructure in rural areas is unique engineering. And I've not heard this discussed in this room, but these people are doing unique engineering. It's B4RN in England. It stands for Broadband for the Rural North. And they have 3 unique features to their program. One is a lot of volunteer labor. The second is a unique funding program, which probably isn't available in the United States. But the clever engineering that they're doing is they're burying the fiber in people's backyards. They stay off the public right-of-way as much as they can. They sneak under roads whenever they can. And so it dramatically reduces their costs.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. Actually, I lived in the UK before, and we did research on the Barn Initiative, and like you said, it's one of very few initiatives going on in the UK because there is still a lot of red tape. So to get to the point where they actually had to make sure that BT, British Telecoms, who had or won the bid for providing rural broadband in all of the UK, so they had to petition their community to say they don't want it. And then once BT said, okay, we can't serve the community because they're not interested, then they bought fiber, rented fiber, dark fiber, and so it's a great project. And so that is actually something I forgot to say. Any red tape that we can cut for municipalities and communities to do something like that, that would be a great step forward.
Excellent. Okay. Do you have a question? Kevin, you had talked about examples in, I think, Alpena and some more remote areas where they're doing some interesting things.
Well, I think the thing where we can't, for a private provider, a lot of times some municipalities have said to us, hey, can you put this infrastructure on private property? And, we tend to avoid doing that whenever possible because the purpose of deploying infrastructure is to, utilize the public rights of way so we don't have to negotiate with hundreds of homeowners or dozens of homeowners or businesses, right? And so we've sometimes heard that, so the initiative, like for example, where people sneak under roads and do those types of things, ultimately, people are going to get caught, and so we do see where people in the broadband industry do that themselves, right? They'll rather than complying with permit requirements, try to circumvent them or do something and ask for forgiveness. ACD will never do that. We always try to comply completely and totally with permit processes to the T. But that also makes us very sensitive to please help define the rules. So the key thing I would say is, as much as possible, responsiveness is key in standardizing it and posting the rules online, right? So that they're not subject to interpretation. We want to avoid trying to have rules that we don't know about. Now if there's no rules on a municipality's website, then we can kind of default to what's the industry standard or state rules, right? And if municipalities want something different than what is generally the industry norm, then that's great. Type them up, put them on your website, and then so I think the key on that is to try to clarify and simplify rules as much as possible. As I was speaking to him a little while ago, he asked me how much of your costs is to submit permits and comply with permit requirements for the construction. That's in our construction and engineering is about 50%, and the permitting is about 50% of the total cost to deploy. The actual laying of the cable and construction crews out there is the other 50%. So this is a very engineering heavy business. Now, just like building a bridge, you probably want your engineers spending a lot of time when they're designing a new bridge or a new, or a new train or a new railroad system or whatever. So it's not that it's inappropriate, but any way we can drive down that engineering expense, the people who actually build this stuff, my construction workers, I always tell my office people, I go, if we can change one of our office people into somebody who actually does something, not that our office people don't do anything. They don't have a shovel and they don't have a splicing machine. That's what I would always mention. So, anyways, there's my comments.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you might be the last question over here. Yeah. Barb.
Hi, I'm a road commissioner.
Yes.
And I want to speak directly to the permitting issue.
Yep.
I would encourage the incumbent providers to work closely with the County Road Association of Michigan if you want to approach achieving a standard permitting and fee process. I live in Washtenaw County. I'm a Washtenaw County Road Commissioner. And we do everything we can to be helpful. There are obligations that a road commission has to the public to safeguard what's already in the right-of-way. And in some cases, we have over 24 occupants in a right-of-way. So just because it looks like a grassy little shoulder somewhere, there's a lot of stuff in there. And we don't want you punching through gas lines. We don't want you clipping electrical lines. So forgive me if the process seems a bit onerous. In Washtenaw County, we'll do our best to be helpful. Secondly, I live in Sharon Township, which is in Washtenaw County. We have a millage on the ballot on May 8th to build fiber optic infrastructure in our township because the incumbent carriers refuse to help us. We have begged, we have asked, they refuse to help us. They run fiber through our township and won't let us connect. So what we're left with is doing it ourselves because nobody else will play ball with us. So I just want to be clear that there are two sides to this story. Road commissions are not the problem. And local people with no other option are left to do something, or our kids can't do their homework. People literally can't update their pacemakers, which they do online now. And we have people who work from home who have to move because they can't have enough speed or bandwidth to accomplish their business.
Big impact, I know. Right here.
Mike Watson, just a point of clarification perhaps for the group. Kevin, would you agree that the regulatory process that you go through for laying fiber under the Metro Act is fairly simple under the state Metro Act since 2002 versus what I think you and others have run into in terms of trying to wind their way through the local regulations for wireless, where we're putting big antennas on top of phone poles and so on?
Yes, so the Metro Act covers municipalities in their authority to authorize installation of infrastructure. And that has greatly speeded the broadband deployment in Michigan. Road commissions, it's a road commission by road commission type of standard. So the answer to your question is absolutely. The Metro Act has greatly simplified the deployment of infrastructure in the utility rights-of-way, and it has a disproportionate benefit in municipalities that that are cities, because they're not governed by road commissions. Where there's road commissions, we have to both comply with the Metro Act, and then we also have to separately comply with the road commissions. And some road commissions are great to work with, some are not. And so what our proposal is, our thought is let's use the same rules which we know work really well for municipalities and use those on road commissions. And there's, ongoing legislation that attempts to kind of standardize at least the fee structure associated with that. And I think in rural areas, we're always going to be dealing with road commissions, right? Because the roads are controlled by typically road commissions in all of these townships and rural areas. So having extremely good standards and working relationships with road commissions is critically important. And, that's primarily the definition. And I know there's a lot of infrastructure underground. I mean, we built in downtown Chicago. So we sometimes get, gee, why do you need to put another wire in here? Well, there's a lot of them here and there's not room for more. That's a comment we commonly get. Well, they figured out how to put a heck of a lot of conduit in downtown Chicago and New York, so there's almost always room.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to tie this up.
Great.
And I think we've got several ideas on how infrastructure is the buzzword, right? This is the real priority, not only in the state, but across the nation and actually across the world in all kinds of ways. We started off today talking about how broadband was not only an infrastructure issue, but an economic issue, an education issue, a social justice issue. And Barb, thank you for your comments, because you really hit home on how this broadband access impacts everyday life, the quality of life. And so with that in mind, I'm going to turn to my panelists and let them have a 30-second message to you as we close out the day. So Phoebe?
My
Start
core
us off
message
there.
is to keep in mind that everyone that we've spoken to, at least, is interested. So we need to stop saying people who are offline are not interested. That's not the case. And then I think the second message is that there are things we can do. This is not a problem that is not solvable. There are a ton of solutions out there, and I think we just gotta roll our sleeves up and do it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So as someone coming from the research and education area, really what we do, Merritt kind of paved the way for the commercial internet as you know it today, 50 years ago, and our focus has always been on innovation. So yes, certainly as somebody who does own and operate networking, along with, some of my colleagues here, infrastructure is very, very critically important, but we also need to consider and continue to look at innovative ways to serve people when the infrastructure isn't available. I think it's a two-edged sword that we need to continue to look at.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think the final point that I want to make is that access to the internet impacts everybody. It impacts our residents, businesses, all of our anchor institutions, and our communities. And it's not up to the private sector, it's not up to the public sector, it's up to everybody to come together around this topic and work together to solve these problems. Like Vivi said, these aren't unsolvable issues, but it's going to take collective action to make it happen. It's not just infrastructure, it's also about affordability and awareness and digital literacy, and then how do we leverage these connections to, again, improve Michigan's standing in a digital economy.
Thank you, Eric.
So I think the key is continuous, nonstop communication, right? I'm in the communications business, and the big thing I do at my office is try to get everybody in a room to talk to each other. The engineers typically don't do that real well, and they're great at emailing, but sometimes it's a little quicker. So I think a lot of this is just trying to refine. Don't get into loggerheads. Person bad, person good. Private sector bad, public sector good. None of that makes any difference. It's not going to move us all forward. So what has to happen is continuous communication. Lots of meetings. That's the key thing. We built a huge network in East Lansing for small cells and a bunch of fiber. They have extremely high standards. They're very, sometimes the standards we don't think are exactly where they should have been, right? But, but if they don't like something, they let us know in 3 or 4 days, and we revise it and refine it, right? I don't mind that people have extremely high standards, but it's about speed, right? That's the key thing. Take each capital investment as a benefit to the community, because ultimately that's what it is. But providers are not going to build somewhere if it takes them 3 months to get a return phone call or get a meeting. Okay. So I think that's the key is let's be quick.
Excellent. Excellent. Speaking of meetings, the next time we hope to meet you is March 28th when we talk about the health of the Great Lakes, which is, again, an issue that's important to all of us, I believe. Please help me in thanking our panelists, and thank you for being here.